so happy to have him because he's a good friend of mine and he's an amazing leader and a good friend in the community. So without further ado, we're going to welcome Mike.
Thank you, Jay. Well, thank you guys for having me here today. You know, when I was in school, a long, long time ago, about 10 years ago, I was super excited for this class called management. And I was super excited for it because I thought, what a great way to learn about how to inspire other people to produce results that are far greater than they can achieve on their own. And so I was starting to count down, and it was a little weird. I counted down months in advance, then down to weeks in advance, and then every day leading up to it, I counted down for the first day of class. I got there, and the first day of class was okay. We covered the syllabus and some basic information, nothing too exciting. But then I went in the second day of class expecting a lot, and still, there wasn't much. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh day of classes, I still was becoming more and more disheartened about how the lack of information really shared with me in that class. In fact, it got so disheartened that at one point, I stopped going to this management class that I was so excited for. And I remember the final exam, where the professor actually had questions in the exam about what his dog's name was and what his kids' names were. Just little things to try to make sure that you were actually in class. See, the reality is I didn't learn much in that class, and I know Jay is a far better professor than I ever had. But still, there are things that I have learned in the last 10, 12 years that I wish I would have learned in that class. So today, those are the principles that I want to cover with you and share the key aspects, the key things that I believe make for successful managers and leaders. So, we'll dive into that today. The key points today, we'll be covering personal growth. And then we'll be covering the vision of an organization, and then that team, and then the management, and then we'll cover a few final thoughts and then some additional resources. So you guys ready? Yeah. Wow, you guys are not that excited this morning, are you? Let's try that again. Are you guys ready? Yeah. Awesome. Okay, well, let's dive into personal growth. See, the reality is you can't build an incredible organization until you first build yourself. Because people will follow great leaders and great people. You know, one quote I heard from a person much wiser than me is this. He said, "The speed of the leader is the speed of the team." And what he meant by that is that the leader really sets the bar, not through what he says, but what he does. As a leader, you should be putting in 120% into your organization because people will only put some fraction of what you're putting into that organization. So if you're putting in 100%, they'll put in 90. If you're only putting in 20%, coming in at 10, leaving at noon, they're going to only put in 5%, lower than what you put in. So one of the first key principles is to make sure that you are being the kind of person that you want in your own organization. If you look back throughout history, you have kings, right? And the king was the king only because his father was king. And his father's father was king. And his father's father's father was king. So you have this king who's the leader of a country, and usually they ended up not being that great. And the reason is because the king became self-serving. He was focused on his own desires and wants, and not about the desires and the wants of the people in his own country. And that is a key thing that started to make them not a very good leader. See, being a great leader is about serving others. It's about serving the people underneath you. It's about understanding their problems, their issues, and helping them solve those things. You know, one important principle that I've learned is that if you look at your body, you can see only about 70% of it directly. But if you have a mirror or a couple mirrors, you can see the rest of your body. And the reality is that people around you can see all of you, the back of your head, for example. The same is true with your personality. You can only see about 70% of your personality, the person you are. But the people in your life, they can see all of it. That means if you have issues with how you behave and how you interact with other people, they see it. In fact, all of your weaknesses, your friends and your family, they see it, even if you may not. So one thing that I encourage leaders to go through is something called 360-degree feedback. And that's where you get surveys or questionnaires, or you have an actual person go and interview others and to learn about who you are as a person. Because then you can start to understand your greatest weaknesses in further depth. And it's really hard to hear that. But the thing is, everyone can already see it. So it's important to understand what that is so that you can start to address it. And one of the things that I struggle with is that I focus super narrowly on whatever I'm working on. And I can completely ignore everyone else in my world when I'm focused on a particular task. And that comes to bite me at times. For example, a few weeks ago, we had a major $15 million loan closing. And there was some paperwork I had to get filled out and completed by Thursday night at 4:30. It was very precise. If I didn't get it done by then, the entire $15 million loan would have gone away. And I didn't know I needed that, and I was so busy focusing on my other tasks that my assistant was just trying to get my attention all day long to get that filled out. And at the very last second, she finally got my attention to do it. Of course, the next day, she was very clear with me on my failure and how difficult it was to get my attention. But it's important to know those things so that you can start to work on them yourself. Another really important principle is that you want to help others succeed. When you go out and network and connect with other people, it's about giving to them. It's not about taking from them. So you can group everyone in the world into three major categories. You have the givers, you have the matchers, and you have the takers. The takers are those who want to take everything for themselves. The matchers try to balance it out. I give you this, you give me that. But the givers are the ones who give and help other people achieve their dreams unconditionally. They expect nothing in return. And who might you think is actually the best at producing results in the long term? Do you guys have a guess?
Givers.
Givers? Any other guess? Matchers? It turns out the givers are actually the worst. And they're also the best. It turns out you have to break that category into two different groups. Really, the givers who let people just completely take advantage of them versus the givers who set appropriate boundaries. But the givers who set appropriate boundaries actually perform the best. And I have a picture. You want to show this? This is my wife's dad. And he is the biggest giver I know of in my entire life. He will do anything for you, anything at all. Get you food, just take care of our kids, do whatever we need. He'll give without expecting anything in return. But what that's done for me is that any time he asks for anything or has any little need that I can even perceive, I will jump, I will go to the nth degree to help him out. And that's the power of giving, is you create these bonds between people throughout your organization, throughout your network, who are willing to jump and do anything to help you achieve what you're trying to achieve. So, overall, developing yourself first is critical. If you don't develop yourself, if you think that leadership is about people following you instead of you serving them, you won't be a successful leader. So develop yourself first. Let's jump into our next topic, vision. So vision, the other big important piece of leadership is understanding what the long-term vision, what the long-term goals, what the 10,000-foot view of your organization is. And for this, there are multiple parts, but let me start off with a story. See, when I was in school, I sat down and had the opportunity to meet with the strategic visionary of one of the most important organizations here in the Twin Cities. And it was fantastic. I got just an hour and a half of lunch for them. And he sat down and he said, Mike, with your organization that you're hoping to run, what is your purpose? And I looked at him, I'm like, I got this one, I know it. I told him, it's about building apartment buildings. We're gonna build lots of apartment buildings, that's our purpose. And he looked at me with a straight face and said, no, that's not your purpose. The strategic visionary of one of the most important companies asked me a question, a really basic one, and I gave him the wrong answer. I'm a fool, right? Well, he went on to explain the purpose is the reason why you exist. What I gave him was some sense of mission, which is what you're trying to accomplish. So for us, it's taken years, but we finally understood what our purpose is. The reason why we exist is simply to create a better way for people to live. Our mission, or what we do, is we build and manage quality buildings, apartments. Another important part of your overall vision is understanding your values. The values are who you are. In fact, when we hire somebody new, we spend the very first hour with each new employee talking about values. We have 5 main values, and we cover each one of those in depth. We talk about stories behind each one, and then we spend time with each employee having a discussion about those values, trying to help them internalize what those values are. And then when we fire people or look at how they're doing in their performance, we also look at if they're the right fit for the organization when it comes to values. Because you need the right kind of people to be in your organization, and that is defined through your values. Then we have goals. So our purpose is why we exist, our mission is what we do. Our goals help outline where we want to hit at what point in time. Now, do you guys read Good to Great? Is that one of the, no? Okay, homework, I highly recommend reading Good to Great. It's one of the most famous business books out there by Jim Collins. And in his book, he talks about a principle called big, hairy, audacious goals. It's those crazy big goals that you can only dream of. And you want to make sure that you outline what your big, hairy, audacious goals are. For us, it's to have around 190,000 apartment units under management within the next 40 years. That's a big, hairy, audacious goal. We take that big, hairy, audacious 40-year goal, we break it down into a 10-year goal, and then we break that down into a 3-year goal, and then a 1-year goal, and then we have quarterly goals that we also measure. And that helps keep us on track so that every quarter we're doing what we need to do in order to achieve those goals. We also have strategies. And strategies are specific things that we're doing to really try to fulfill our purpose. Our strategies include things like lifestyle living, and actually Jay's MBA class helped us come up with some of these. But lifestyle living is about providing more than just an apartment. It's about providing an entire lifestyle to people. For example, we've recently partnered with HomeTread, which is a company that will actually come repair your vehicle at your home. What an incredible way to provide additional lifestyle for our people. There's a number of different things we're doing there, but another important strategy is smart apartments. So we have about 10% of our company are software developers. We've developed a lot of technology that goes in behind the scenes in our apartments, but also customer-facing technologies like smart apartments. We're also working on technologies where people can come do a tour themselves by downloading an app to your phone, and then that phone guides you through the building and helps unlock doors for you as you go through, and you can tour the apartments. So technology is a big piece for us. Another one is community. We want to build properties where people are really connected with each other at an authentic level, building real, true relationship with one another. And so we've started things like different community events, but one of the best has been our resident board, where we've actually brought residents in and they become part of this resident board where they instigate change at our properties. Another one is simply giving back. We partner and help provide for the homeless. We also partner with small and local businesses in our community. And we're also really big in employee engagement. and building great environments for employees to really feel engaged and part of our organization. But with all of this vision stuff, the one principle that I've really learned is this. See, when I first started, I thought, just give me a couple hours, give me a weekend, and I can figure out what our purpose, our mission, our values, and all that stuff is. But that isn't true. In fact, it takes years. As you're developing your purpose, mission, and vision for your own organization, start out by trying to put something together, and then run your business for a while, and then come back to it and see how it feels, how it actually works, and tweak it, and tweak it, and tweak it. It took us years to get to an understanding of what our purpose really was. But that's just part of the process. So let's show, do I have some pictures? What's the next one? Ah, yes. So I love this picture because this picture really illustrates what our purpose is all about, creating that better way to live. This is actually taken at one of our resident events a few months ago. And I just love seeing the real authentic relationships being built within that event. What's the next picture we have? So here this actually outlines our goals. So we have that 40-year goal laid out. Every single year we have how many units we want to be at. And you can see we've been following, almost tracking exactly where we expect to be every year. There's a little bit of fluctuation there, that's normal, but yeah. The next major category is your team. You know, this summer, I met up with our staff for a summer picnic that we had. And I gave a little speech to the staff, explaining where our company is at and stuff. And at one point, I looked around the room and I said, we are a bunch of misfits. And they looked at me silently. Like, did he just insult us? Is this really going on here? And I didn't mean to be insulting, but the truth is that one of our personal strategies for team members have been finding the people who are fantastic individuals who haven't been given the shot that they deserve in life. And every single one of them have different stories that really illustrate how they weren't given the shot. Once we gave them the shot, they have been fantastic. And most of our top leadership team are all fall underneath that umbrella. But one of the most important things here is finding the right people and putting them in the right seat. I can't stress this enough. If you have the wrong people in your organization, life will be miserable, utterly miserable. I can tell you because I've lived it, and I have lots of friends who run organizations here in the Twin Cities, and they have lived it too. Find the right people. Hire slow, fire fast. With the other part of it is having the right seats. So let's go to the next slide, I think. Yeah. So it's important to have an organizational structure. So this is just a piece of ours. But one of the things that we do is we try to be really clear on exactly the kinds of responsibilities every seat is responsible for. Every person knows their responsibilities. No responsibility is assigned to more than one person, because if responsibility is assigned to more than one person, it's assigned to no one. The other thing that we do is really trying to understand the load balancing here. Some positions can get absolutely overworked, and we need to understand where that's at so that we can balance and reorganize that load structure. And so we do that maybe even quarterly, pretty often. Another one is, I mentioned earlier, fire fast, but it's important to fire poor performers. I know a few years ago, we had getting one of our properties approved, or properties completed. And we had just a terrible time with the city. In fact, we were shut down by the city for this construction project and asked to get a new project manager to manage the site. This was a tough time for me and our organization. And we had just a couple days to find a new construction manager. That is not a lot of time for such a major position out there. We were able to find someone, but it turned out they weren't the right fit. And we spent so much time understanding that and then eventually moving that person out of the organization. Once we did, life became so much better. But until then, life was challenging. And one of the most important points about letting people go is that you want to make it their choice. Kind of weird, huh? How do you make firing someone their choice? The challenge is giving them specific behaviors that they're engaging in that are not appropriate, like arriving late to work. Then, after repeated warnings, if they continue to engage in that behavior, they will be fired. So it's their choice because they can either choose to be late to work or they can choose not to be. If they choose to be late to work, they're choosing to be fired. Firing should never be a surprise to anyone. Another key principle, Steve Jobs used to talk about this a lot, which is that you want to hire A players, and after you hire a certain number of A players, the group becomes self-policing. It's magical. Because if they have players who are not being A players, or B, C, D players, they start helping you move them out of the organization or to a different position. So A players attract more A players. Another thing is, it's so important to recognize that you serve your team. I have another picture. Well, actually, hold on. I want to give you another story. See, a few months ago, one of our staff members suddenly became homeless. Like just one day, she had a home, the next day, she didn't. And she had 2 young children. She didn't know where she was going to go. She was pretty new to Minnesota, so she didn't have friends or family here to help. She contacted the only person that she knew might be able to help, and that was her manager. And her manager that day put her in a hotel to stay overnight. Then she contacted me. We put it on social media. It blew up. And we had people all over the nation reach out to help support her. We had baby clothes from, I think, Alabama. We had Tupperware from Florida. We had enough money raised that we had her first 2 months of rent paid for and her deposit paid for. We even had a guy handcrafted a kitchen table for her. So in a matter of 2 days, she went from not having a home and actually completely distracted at work because she didn't know where she was going to stay, to having not only a place to stay, but a furnished home to live in. And this here, I want to show the picture. This is a picture of her literally 2 days after she became homeless. Here she is confident, she's excited, and she is a totally different person just a couple days later. And see, the important point here is that we serve our team. We serve our staff. It's so important to remember. They don't serve us, we serve them. Richard Branson talks about, one of my favorite principles is that we need to be employee-centric, not customer-centric. That might seem backwards, right? That we're not caring about our customer, we're caring about our employees. But the reason we do that is because if we care about our customers without focusing on our employees, we won't really achieve great customer service because our employees will be left in the dust and they're the ones dealing with the customers. But if instead we focus on our customers, we make them the priority and work to serve them, that oozes later from them to our customers. So be employee-centric, not customer-centric. All right, so that's team. The last major section is management. So there's a lot here. Management basically is the behaviors that you engage in on a day-to-day basis to move your organization forward. And for us, there's a number of important behaviors. One of those is called a one-on-one. If you want one silver bullet from this discussion, there isn't any silver bullet, but if there was, this would be it, the one-on-one. A one-on-one for us is a half-an-hour meeting between the supervisor and the employee every single week. So I have 7 direct reports right now, and I have a half-an-hour meeting with each one of those every single week. And those direct reports have a half-an-hour meeting with their direct reports. It's so important because a couple principles. One is you need to build relationship with your staff. Relationships are built with time, consistent time. And so one-on-ones are a way to do that. The second way is to stop and listen, to be quiet and just hear what the employee has to say. So my one-on-ones literally start with how's it going, and then I'm silent, usually for like 20 minutes, as I listen to the issues that are going on, the problems they're dealing with, and actually, not too uncommon, all the issues they have with me. But it's good to hear all of that so that I can understand what they're going through, to understand how I can help. Another important principle is this. Yes, I have a poker chip in my pocket. It doesn't mean I have a gambling addiction. In fact, I don't gamble. As an aside, this poker chip is from Tapeface. Any of you guys watch America's Got Talent? Sometimes, some of you. Well, a couple years ago in America's Got Talent, one of the top performers and my favorite was Tapeface. He had a piece of tape on his face, you remember, and he did this silent comedic routine. It was hilarious. I loved him. I wish he would have won. He didn't win. I'm still holding a grudge. But within the last few months, I actually had the opportunity to meet Tapeface, and he gave me this poker chip that has no point to what I'm about to say, but it's a fun side story. The point, though, is that this poker chip for me is a reminder. My goal every day is to take the poker chip from my left pocket and put it into my right pocket. I can do that only when I give a piece of feedback to somebody. And so the way we do feedback is we first ask them if they want to receive feedback. Why do you think we do that? Anyone have a guess? The reason why we ask is because feedback is not about us getting something off of our chest as a manager. Yes, we might get frustrated and angry and mad that people aren't doing what we want them to do. That's not the point. Feedback is about helping out the individual. You want to help them be a better person. And so feedback is a tool to do that. So we first ask, because if they're not ready to hear it, there's no point in giving it to them. If they say yes, then we talk about a specific behavior they engage in. Having a good attitude is not a specific behavior. They can't repeat good attitude. So there's no point in discussing that. Instead, you can talk about how they smiled when they walked in to greet you. You can talk about how they were on time in the morning. You can talk about how they volunteered to take on an extra task to help the organization get to its goals. After you mention their specific behavior, you talk about the results of that behavior, and then either way to go, keep it up, or what can you do to improve it, depending if it's positive or negative feedback. Another important set of things is meetings. And when I was first managing, I heard all of this clamoring about how meetings were evil. Have no meetings, stay away from meetings, avoid as many meetings as you possibly can. While that is somewhat true, there are important meetings to be had. And meetings aren't evil if they're fantastic meetings. And so for us, we have a handful of meetings. One is our quarterly leadership team meetings. And so we take all of our leadership team quarterly off-site for an entire day where we talk about things like our purpose, mission, and values. We talk about our goals, and we spend most of the time dealing with issues. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. Another important set of meetings is what we call our L10 meetings. We have those every single week with every supervisor and their direct staff. So that happens at every level of our company. Those are between an hour to an hour and a half long, where we follow up on the to-dos to make sure that people actually made them or finished them. We also look at our overarching goals for the quarter to see if they're on track. But most of the time, again, is spent on issues. For us, we have an issues list. The issues list might be 15 items long. And we'll work and we'll solve the top 3 most important issues one by one. And we may only get 1 or 2 done in a meeting. But the goal is to have an actual solution to that issue, which may end up in to-do items that get added onto the to-do list, and we check on that next week. One last thing is a scorecard. We actually measure about 15 or so different metrics about our organization, and we review that weekly, and we actually look to see if those measurements are on track, because what gets measured gets done. So, thank you for listening. Let's move on to the final thoughts. You're almost there. Good work. One of the things that I have learned is that management and leadership is really about a handful of pretty simple principles. It's easy to understand this stuff. The challenge is making it a habit. Building it into your daily routine, building into the daily routine of everyone in your staff. That's where the magic is, and that is where the hard work is as well. You know, if you imagine riding a bike, you can intellectually know how to ride a bike. Turn the handle left and you go left. Turn the handle right and you go right. But you need to make that a deep habitual thing in order to be good at riding a bike through the neighborhood. Let me mention this. Want to show the next slide? Another important final thought is that most people believe that you either succeed or you fail. The reality is that failure is part of the path to success. Oftentimes people get disheartened after the second or third failure and want to give up. That's the worst time to give up, because you're all that much closer to understanding what it takes to win. The people who truly succeed are the ones who are willing to have the perseverance to work through the failures to eventually obtain success. Let's show the next slide. Here is the path of what it's like creating a new company or leading a new organization. You often start off with, yes, this is the best idea ever. I'm super excited about it. And then it kind of dies off a little bit. You're like, oh, this is harder than I thought. And then you're like, oh, this will be a lot of work. And then, oh my gosh, this is awful. And you enter this deep, dark swamp of despair, maybe a few swear words. And eventually you claw your way out of it and can see some success. But the magic here is this red line. What people on the outside world often see is just the end. They see it as an overnight success. But the reality of overnight successes is they're first led by years and years and years of pain and failure. So when you go through that pain and failure throughout your life, remember that's just part of the journey. It's just the part of the journey you don't hear about very often. So let me share one final story with you and we'll wrap up. You know, about 6-9 months ago, we started doing social media, started doing marketing. In fact, our company didn't do hardly any marketing before that point. And we started putting posts and stuff out there, and I actually don't enjoy social media that much. I had to get into it to start it, but I started putting posts out there. And it was hard putting posts out there because you're putting yourself out there for the world to see, and you're not sure how they'll respond. But most of my posts weren't doing very well at all. In fact, on Twitter, I think at one point I was at 36 followers. That's down from 37 the week before that. So really not going very well. And I remember sitting down with one of the top marketing executives here in the Twin Cities. And we sat down for a couple hours. He reviewed what we were doing. And he looked at me and said, Mike, you're screwing up. You're focused too much on yourself in these posts, and you're not focused on what other people want. And that was hard. We dove into it for literally 2 hours where I was just beat down to a pulp. I remember that night I called one of my mentors and I said, man, what am I doing? This is just failing. I should just pause, stop, and reevaluate this and maybe look at this again in a few months. And he's like, no, Mike, just keep going. Keep doing your best. Eventually, you get out of that deep, dark pit of despair. So that night, I decided to put a post out there about how we were training up one of our staff members who didn't have a lot of experience, but we wanted to invest in him so that he could be fantastic and reach his dreams. Let's take a look at the next slide. So this is that post. And so this was on LinkedIn. This ended up being one of the biggest posts on LinkedIn at that point in time. We had 225,000 views, over 3,000 likes, over 300 comments, and this was just the beginning. After this sparked a big wave where we actually started getting posts that were getting hundreds of thousands of views, 30,000 likes on some of the posts, and a few weeks ago LinkedIn contacted me and actually stated that I was the reason they contacted me was I was one of their top 11 influencers on LinkedIn. This wouldn't have happened had I not powered through that dark pit of despair. So, wrapping up, here are a couple resources, next slide, that I highly recommend. Manager Tools is a podcast that talks about how to become a strong manager. I have learned so much from them. In fact, I've listened to almost all of their podcasts. They are fantastic. And many of the principles you heard about today came from that. Another important set of tools is EOS. It's a very popular way in the Midwest right now of managing mid to large size organizations. There's a couple of good books. Get a Grip by Mike Payton is about it, where it's more like a story version. And Traction is more like a manual of what EOS is. With that, thank you for making it through the entire speech. Thank you.